Hello everyone, this is Matt Seifert with the Real Estate Finance Initiative here to talk to you today about the income return as part of our ongoing Return Series 101. What we're going to talk about today is a basic understanding as to what the income return is, alternative names that it often goes by, how it's calculated, and how it's used. Okay, so let's jump right into what the income return is. And I think it's important first to just note that it's also known as a cap rate. So the cap rate, when folks use that term, they're referring to the income return. If they refer to the income return, they're also referring to the cap rate. It's the same thing. Generally speaking, the cap rate is based upon the year one pro forma NOI, so the net operating income of the property that you are contemplating acquiring. There are some properties, however, property types, that you would tend to look at other periods of time in terms of NOI. For instance, in the multifamily space, you would often look at the trailing NOI period, whether it be 3 months or 6 months, and you would annualize that to get into an NOI of sort of actual returns or actual NOI to be utilized to calculate the cap rate, in addition to also looking at the pro forma cap rate as well. In the development space, it's also known as the return on cost, and it's slightly different, but it would consider a stabilized NOI. So in other words, if you build a building and you lease the building, it would be the net operating income after the building is complete and full with tenants over the construction cost budget. So in terms of calculating the income return, it is generally calculated by taking your NOI and dividing it by the purchase price. And this is often known as IRV, right? Income over rate equals value. If you would take value times rate, you can back into your income, and you can see how you can manipulate the formula to really back into whatever you have in terms of the metrics. But in terms of what we're trying to calculate here, as it relates to a cap rate or the income return, it is the NOI over value equals rate. And it's the inverse of the PE ratio. So a cap rate is NOI over purchase price, whereas a PE ratio is the purchase price over the NOI. So let's talk about an example. So you are contemplating the purchase of a retail property in Ballston, Virginia called Hoya Point. This is a stabilized property that has a single tenant that is credit quality on a long-term lease. You have underwritten the deal as best you can, meaning you have verified and adjusted the revenue, the operating expenses, and the capital expenditures, to arrive at an 11-year cash flow, which we're going to see on the next slide. So the question is, how do I utilize the income return to determine what the asset is worth? And we do that by virtue of evaluating our pro forma, which you see here. And in this case, we're really going to be focusing on the first year because we are calculating the year one pro forma income return, also known as the year one pro forma cap rate. Properties tend to trade at equivalent income returns or equivalent cap rates. And as part of the underwriting process or the valuation process of an investment, you will look to comparable sales to determine where those assets traded from a cap rate perspective. So you can see we've assembled 3 fictitious properties here, and you can look at the cap rates with which these individual assets traded. So the derivation of these individual cap rates ranging from 5.15% to 5.37% is based on the purchase price, and inevitably somebody had access to the property's NOI that had to be utilized to back into the cap rate. So you can see that we have 3 transactions that occurred in the same general vicinity, the same relative time, the same relative square footage, and the same relative occupancy. So these would be highly comparable transactions for the one we're contemplating. So the real question is, how much should we pay for the asset, and ultimately what would the cap rate be? So let's begin with the second question first. The cap rate is, as I've said, a product of the comparable sales that we see. So you can see that the sales have traded in the 5.15 to 5.37% cap rate range. So you could make your bid theoretically at something likely in that low 5s range. So perhaps a 5 to a 5.15% bid. So that would result in a value range of, call it $12.25 million down to $11.9. That is really the art here, in the sense that you need to make a bid that you feel is appropriate relative to the return you require. So as an example, you could bid a 6.25 cap rate, which would result in a value of $9.8 million. But if you see all of these other transactions that are highly comparable trading in the low fives, you are unlikely to get selected in the bid process. So the income return is really a single year valuation estimate, as we've identified here. And you really would utilize, as I've said, the cap rates from comparable sales to back into the purchase price of the asset that you're considering buying. So with that, we'll conclude this session on the income return, and we certainly appreciate your time and welcome you to reach out if you have any questions.